A scalpel slipped during an autopsy and nicked a professor's finger. Within days, the professor was dead. When they opened his body, a young assistant stared at the organs and went very still, because he had seen this before, not in a man, in the bodies of women, hundreds of women, women who had come into the hospital to give birth, and who had died over and over of a disease nobody could name. In that moment, Ignaz Semmelweis understood what was killing them, and he understood that he and every doctor around him had been the cause. He was born on the 1st of July 1818 in Buda, the hilly half of what would one day become Budapest. His father was a prosperous grocer. The family was German-speaking, comfortable, ordinary. Ignaz was the fifth of 10 children. He was sent to Vienna in 1837 to study law. His father wanted him to become a military judge, a safe career, something respectable. But one afternoon, he went with some medical student friends to watch an autopsy. And that was the end of law. He switched to medicine. He finished his degree in 1844. And in 1846, he took a job as an assistant in the first obstetrical clinic of the Vienna General Hospital. That is where the story really begins. The Vienna General Hospital had 2 maternity wards. They were identical in almost every way. Same building, same patients, same admission days. The patients were poor, mostly unmarried, mostly desperate. They came to the hospital because it was free. In the first clinic, doctors and medical students did the deliveries. In the second clinic, midwives did. That was the only real difference. And in the first clinic, roughly 1 in 10 women died of something called puerperal fever, childbed fever, a slow, agonizing death, a few days after giving birth, from infection raging through the body. In the second clinic, the death rate was around 1 in 30. The women knew the numbers. They pleaded to be sent to the midwife's ward. Some gave birth in the street rather than risk the first clinic. And still, nobody knew why. The theories were endless. Bad air, cold drafts, emotional disturbance, overcrowding, the position of the planets. Doctors argued. Nothing worked. Semmelweis was 28 years old. He watched women die week after week, and he became obsessed with the question. Then, in March 1847, his friend and colleague Jakob Kolletschka was doing an autopsy with students when one of them slipped and nicked Kolletschka's finger with the scalpel. Kolletschka fell ill. Within days, he was dead. When they examined his body, Semmelweis stared at the organs and recognized what he was seeing. The same inflammation, the same pattern, the same disease that was killing the mothers upstairs. A man had died from the same thing, through a cut, through material passed from a corpse into his bloodstream. And then Semmelweis made the leap. The doctors in the first clinic started every morning in the autopsy room, dissecting the bodies of women who had died the day before. Then, without washing, they walked upstairs and examined living pregnant women. The midwives in the second clinic did no autopsies. That was the difference. That had always been the difference. The doctors themselves, the educated, the respected, the men of science, were carrying death on their hands. In May 1847, he ordered every doctor and student on his ward to wash their hands in a solution of chlorinated lime before touching a patient. Not ordinary soap and water, which didn't remove the smell of the corpses, and therefore, he reasoned, didn't remove whatever the smell carried, a harsh chemical scrub. The results were almost unbelievable. In April 1847, the mortality rate in his ward was 18%. By June, it was 2%. By August, under 2%. For 2 months the following year, for the first time in the clinic's history, the death rate hit 0. He had done it. A young assistant in a single hospital ward had halted a disease that had killed women across Europe for centuries. You would expect the world to applaud. It did not. His boss, Johann Klein, the head of the clinic, did not like being told his hands were dirty. Very few doctors did. The idea that they, gentlemen, professionals, healers, were carrying death from the morgue into the delivery room was not just uncomfortable, It was an accusation. It implied guilt. It implied that every woman who had died on their watch had died because of them. Semmelweis's contract as assistant was not renewed. In March 1849, he was pushed out. He was offered a lesser position later, a demeaning one, teaching with leather mannequins, forbidden to touch a cadaver. He stayed briefly. Then, in 1850, without saying goodbye, he left Vienna and went home to Pest. In Hungary, he took an unpaid job at a small hospital. He kept washing hands. He kept saving lives. He married Maria Weidenhofer, 19 years younger than him, in 1857. They had 5 children. 2 died in infancy. In 1855, he was finally given a professor's chair at the University of Pest, a real position at last. But the world outside Hungary was still ignoring him, and he knew it, and it began to break him. In 1861, he published his great book, The Full Argument, 14 Years of Evidence, the etiology, concept, and prophylaxis of childbed fever. Reviewers called it disorganized and obscure. Foreign obstetricians dismissed him, and Semmelweis, watching women continue to die in wards across Europe, stopped being polite. He began to write open letters to famous obstetricians, by name. He called them ignorant. He called them murderers. He accused them directly of killing their own patients. The letters were furious, obsessive, and, from a man trying to persuade his colleagues, catastrophic. By 1865, his friends described him as a different person, forgetful, manic, drinking, angry at everyone. The exact nature of his illness is still disputed by historians. Some suspect early Alzheimer's. Some suspect syphilis. Some argue it was simply the slow destruction of a man who had watched the world ignore him for 20 years. On the 30th of July, 1865, a colleague lured him to Vienna under the pretense of visiting a new institute. It was a mental asylum. He realized what was happening and tried to leave. The guards beat him. They put him in a straitjacket. They locked him in a darkened cell. 2 weeks later, on August 13th, he was dead. The cause, according to the autopsy, was pyemia, blood poisoning, from an infected wound on his right hand. The man who had discovered how doctors pass infection from one body to another had been killed by exactly that. He was 47. Only a handful of people went to his funeral. His own department in Pest did not send a delegation. The newspapers barely noticed. He was buried quietly in Vienna, the city that had ruined him. 14 years later, Louis Pasteur identified the bacterium Streptococcus that caused the fever Semmelweis had been trying to stop. In Britain, Joseph Lister had already begun his antiseptic surgery, carbolic acid on wounds and instruments, and the death rates of his patients had collapsed. Germ theory arrived. The argument ended. And slowly, reluctantly, the medical world admitted that the Hungarian assistant, dead in a Vienna asylum, had been right about all of it. Today, his name is everywhere. The medical university in Budapest is named after him. There is a Semmelweis reflex, a term coined in the 20th century, for the instinct to reject new evidence simply because it contradicts what you already believe. Every hospital in the world now runs on the principle he discovered, alone, in 1847. A boy in Buda had chosen medicine over law. A young doctor had watched women die and refused to stop asking why. He had found the answer. He had been destroyed for it. And in a darkened cell in Vienna, dying from an infection on his own right hand, he became the last unwanted proof of his own theory. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe for more.